Welcome to the second video in No Breaks November, where I am spending every day of November bringing you guys tutorials and maybe some other content interspersed in there as well. Today's video is going to be all about the basics of color grading, what tools you need to know how to use in order to get color grades that you're after. It's not going to be anything insane today, we're not going to be getting too in-depth, but we are going to cover all of the basics that you need to really get off to the races and get going color grading your own footage or other footage to make your films look better. Alright, so to get started, we have a bunch of clips right here. We've got this red flower, we've got some hurricane damage in the Keys, we have this wall, we have a bridge, and my living room, and a fountain. So we're going to get started in color grading by doing each of those so that you guys can see some of the different techniques and kind of tools that are available to you to color grade different scenes. So we'll jump on over into the color page to get started. Now we're on the colors page. We've got our LUTs up in the top left. We have all of our clips in our timeline right here in our little timeline viewer. We can move around using this timeline or by clicking on each individual clip. We have our color wheels down here in the bottom left. We can adjust things by their level of luminance, essentially. So we have gain, which takes care of the highlights, or all of the brightest parts of the image. So it will affect those the most drastically, and it will still affect the other two, but it will be at a reduced amount. So if we go ahead and make that all the way red, we'll see that the whole image kind of shifts. But then if we take the gamma, which represents the midtones, and move that down in the opposite direction, we see that some of those colors start to come back toward the middle, like this whitish area on this lichen on these rocks. The lift takes care of the shadows. So if we watch in these darker areas, like right here and maybe up on this tree, we're going to get a pretty significant color change in those areas, while we should get a little bit less out here. Because of the camera that I shot this on though, shadows kind of take up a very large portion of what we're looking at in the image, even though it looks pretty well exposed to the eye. So I'll go ahead and reset that. This is normal. In order to reset, you just click on these little swirly arrows. If you want to reset all of them, you click on the swirly arrow with the plus in it, and that will reset your offset, gain, gamma, and lift wheels. For the shadows with the lift, we'll make that like a little bit bluish, greenish, and you really don't need to drag these very far most of the time. A little goes a long way. So if we zoom in now on these shadows, we'll pick this one. This is a darker area, and if we watch what happens when we use that lift, it changes that color, but it also changes the colors around it, just like the other ones. So you really need to use all three of them unless you're going for like a blanket color look. So we will start with this one of the flower here, and it looks a little bit like it doesn't have enough contrast. It doesn't look very sharp. It's kind of boring looking. So the first thing that we're going to do is grab our curves here, this line in the middle. If we click on this, it generates points on the line, and you can drag those up and down. Up is brighter, down is darker. But you can really mess things up with the curves, so again, a little bit goes a long way. So we'll go ahead and make a point right here, and make a point right here. And this, what we're doing, is going to be a standard S-curve. You can move this top one in if you want the brighter areas of the image to be even brighter. You can move this bottom one in if you want them to become darker. All of the colored areas in your image are actually represented by this colorful histogram right here. So we can see that the red is a little bit brighter than everything else, which makes sense because if we reset this, we have a predominantly red subject. So we have that, we have some of the greens represented back here, but they're not as bright. We have a couple of blues, maybe up in the sky area and down the center of these leaves might count as a blue for the camera. So we'll make that S-curve, we'll bring up the highlights, and we will bring down the darker areas because that's going to do pretty much the same thing, but with more control that would happen if we take this contrast slider down here in the bottom and we bring that up. So we see that those darker areas are getting darker, those lighter areas are getting lighter, but when we use the contrast slider, we don't really have a lot of control over what is being affected, whereas with the curves, we can bring that down, and if we don't like it, maybe we can bring it back up a little bit, or if we want less things to be dark, we can bring it over to the left. And with our highlights, same idea. You have a lot more creative control when you're using curves than you do when you're using the contrast slider down here. That's where we're going to start. We're going to grab our S curve, we're going to make that, and we don't really want to crush any of the blacks. So if you see over here in this colored histogram, 0 is like true black, like there's nothing going on, there's no data left, it's just black. And then 100 is just the opposite, no data left, just white. You don't want to hit either of those points unless you're looking to do that for some creative reason. So if we bring our shadows down, you can see how those are kind of smashing up against the wall, and once they get to that black point, we lose all the data in the middle of this flower here. So we'll go ahead and bring that back up until we have all of our color data represented in the reds, and then we want to make sure that most, if not all, of our color is represented in those highlights. So we'll adjust our points on the line until everything is not clipping or overexposed, and everything is not crushed or underexposed. So we'll get everything where we want it on these histograms, and then we will go ahead and start to adjust some of these settings down here. Again, all of these are going to be able to be adjusted with different things in your curves menu with these little dots up here, but a lot of those do very similar things to what you can do down here. I really like contrast because of the control, but if I'm just like changing the saturation and I don't need to change a specific color saturation, I'm not going to use the hue versus sat, because if we look right here, we can take these purpley colors and reddish colors that are represented on the flower and on the leaves, and we can bring that up so that we get more saturation there. If you look at this leaf tip over here, you can kind of see it very well. So if we bring that down, no more red there, and if we bring it all the way up, it's just purpley red. So we'll go ahead and fit this back in. We'll bring those reds down a touch, and then our overall saturation is going to be controlled with this slider right here. So if we click and drag this number up, every single color in this image is going to become more saturated, and if we drag it down, we're going to get less saturation, which eventually, as you can see right here, leads to black and white footage. Right here, next to saturation, is hue. And for this one, I do actually prefer to get into my hue versus hue menu over here in my curves window. You can use hue versus hue to get specific color ranges and change them. We'll take the flower again, and we'll just change that color. Now it's more purple. And you can see in some areas of the screen that we're just kind of destroying things right now. That's okay. I mean, play around with it. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? You get a little bit better at using hue versus hue? Use it. But the hue slider, like I just mentioned, is actually going to change the hue of every single color in your image. So you can slide that around, and if you see something that looks cool, great, but a lot of the time, if you're just going for like a specific look, you're going to want to use hue versus hue so that you can change individual colors. I'm not going to cover the Lumamix in this because it's not very beginner friendly, and this is a beginner's tutorial. I'm just trying to get you acquainted. I'm not trying to scare you. So if you want to know more in depth about what that does, either let me know in the comments down below and I'll make a video about it, or you can go look up a video about it and watch that one. That covers these, except for pivot, and we're not going to cover pivot for the exact same reason we didn't cover Lumamix. If you're looking to get more in depth with color grading, this is, again, a little bit more of an advanced tool. So we'll go ahead and hit 2 here, and then we'll get into temperature. Temperature is actually harder to adjust like 1-to-1 over here, unless you want to grab your RGB individually. So if we grab our R, we can put more red into our highlight colors. Up in the sky there, when I brighten that red highlight up, we get just red in the sky. You can use that, you can do some serious fine tuning with it to get like warmer or cooler colors represented in different light ranges, but generally when I'm working with temperature, I want to do a whole image adjustment. So maybe my camera was set to a white balance that's a little bit too warm or a little bit too cool, and then I'll just make just a little tweak to get it back where it needs to go, and then I'll leave that alone. It's really, really easy to go overboard with temperature controls because it doesn't take much. You can just go to, I guess, 1,000, seems like a lot, but 400 right here, that's just a quick move of the mouse and you get a much more orange looking piece of footage or a much more blue looking piece of footage. I tend to go easy on that one. I know I keep saying that, but in color grading, oftentimes less is more. You want it to still look real most of the time. And then the tint slider is actually going to control the magenta versus the green. So if we move this to the right, we'll see that everything turns more magenta. And if we move this to the left, everything takes on more of a green hue. And again, that is something that's generally going to be used to counteract a mistaken camera setting or just a camera that records with a little bit of a color cast. And that color cast will normally be one of those two colors, so you just need to bring it back the other way. That's all. The mid-tone detail is kind of going to act like a clarity slider, if you're familiar with that in Photoshop or Lightroom. If you turn that all the way up, all those little details become very harsh and apparent, and if you turn that all the way down, all those small details kind of fade out and get really soft and dreamy. And then color boost, as far as I know, I haven't really looked into this, but when I use it, I kind of use it as like saturation, but if saturation was a superhero. So if we turn this all the way up, that color is going to just explode off the image. Like, check that out. Super colored right there. And then if we turn it all the way down, again, black and white. Shadows, if you want a little bit more of that level control based on dark or light areas of the image, you're still not getting that fine-tuned left and right adjustment that you get with your curves, but you're able to get a little bit more creative freedom. You can drag up specifically the shadows, drag down or up with the highlights. You can adjust individual luminance ranges on your image with those two tools. Now that we've covered most of these tools, we're going to go ahead and actually start to grade some of these different clips so that you guys can get an idea of what the process looks like. And admittedly, a lot of these look alright out of camera because these all actually came from my T6i and it doesn't shoot raw or anything, so everything comes out looking pretty good. But it's a little harder to color grade if you're not shooting in RAW or ProRes or something like that. But it still can be done. You just need to be more gentle, that's all. Because if we take this image and we turn our saturation all the way up, you'll see that a lot of these colors kind of start to break and block up, right? Like this one right here looks, this orange leaf looks pretty bad. And when you shoot on a camera that doesn't shoot RAW or ProRes or something in that realm, you're still going to get good footage. You can still get good footage and you can still color grade it to look great. Like, people use GoPros and shoot amazing stuff and it's all in the grade, really. So we're going to take this one we're going to get started with this image, and if we punch in on it, it starts to lose quality pretty fast. So we're going to stay fitted right here, and then we're going to start with our S-curve. So I'm going to bring those highlights up a little bit. I'm going to bring those darker tones, those shadows down a little bit so that we start with a little bit more contrast. And then I'm actually going to click in the middle of the curve and bring that up a little bit. I'm actually going to click in the middle of the curve and bring that down a little bit to reduce some of the brightness in those midtones. Just because this shot, I'm sure if you watch the channel for a while, you've seen this one before. I like to grade this shot a little bit darker just because I prefer the way it looks. That's what we're doing here, is art. This isn't a science. I mean, there are aspects of it that can be scientific, but this is art. We have our S-curve, which looks kind of wonky, but that's the way that we're doing this one. And then I'm going to actually bring these greens to a different hue. So I want them to be like a darker type color. So we'll grab hue versus hue. We'll get a pretty wide selection on these greens because I want it to affect most of the greens in the image. And I'm just going to wiggle that around until I see something that I like. But I don't want to bring it all the way to one side or the other normally, because especially if we look down here, right? So pay attention to these when I bring this green control all the way down. So I'll go ahead and drag that, and those turn purple. We don't want purple. We still want green, but this shows purple in quite a few of the green areas when we move it that far. So we're going to bring that back up until those are still green, but maybe have a little bit more blue in them, so they're more of a cyan type color. So we'll call that good. We'll go up here to our zoom and just click fit. And then we'll go to our hue versus saturation, and we'll grab a similar range, a wide range, and we're going to saturate those greens a little bit more. And now, for the first time, we're going to talk about hue versus luminance. This is just going to affect the brightness level of the color range that you have selected. So if we have the green selected again, we'll go ahead and bring that brightness down, and all of our greens across the image will become darker. We can do the opposite and make them brighter. So you can see, we'll check out this piece of moss as a specific example. If we look at this moss, if we take this, which is all the way up right now, and bring it all the way down, you can see that that moss changes pretty significantly from there to there. Right? Gets a lot brighter and a lot darker. And you're not really destroying anything when you use this tool, but you can make some effects that don't look that good, so be careful. The offset wheel is like using all three of these other wheels at the same time. So if you want a brighter image, you'll go ahead and turn that up, everything will lighten. You want a darker image, turn that down, everything will get darker. And if you want the whole thing to be covered in a blanket color, you go ahead and just make everything red, or cyan, or blue, or purple. But for this image here, everything's looking alright. There's not really a cast one way or the other, so I'm going to leave that offset where it's at. I'm going to turn the gain, which again controls our brighter areas, our highlights. I'm going to turn that more toward the green here, just to get a little bit more of that mossy vibe going on. And then I'm going to take our gamma, which again is our midtones, and I'm going to make that a little bit on the purpley type side to give a little bit of contrast in that image, because the magenta and the green are direct opposites, so they contrast each other really well. And then we'll actually bring our lift more toward the green as well, so that we have a lot of that green and only a little bit of that purple showing through, so that your brain just is like, oh, very cool green image, but it doesn't recognize right away that we have some nice contrast built in with that magenta in the midtones. And then if you want to see what this looks like with no effects on it after you've done your grade, or even during your grade, to make sure that you're headed in the right direction, just go ahead and click on this effects button right here, and we'll see that it kind of warms up a bit. It just sort of loses some of that punchiness that we added in our grade. It looks a bit more moody, it looks more like fantasy forest type thing, as opposed to this, which doesn't carry the same effect as soon as you see it. So that definitely, at least to me, looks better with the effects on than it does with the effects off. So we've done our job. We'll move on to this one, the hurricane damage one. So this one has a lot more open space, it has a lot more sky, it's got a lot more orange than it does green, so we'll have a little bit of a different thing going on with our color grade. But again, we're going to start with that contrast S-curve. So we'll grab all of our colors here, and we'll make sure that our highlights are higher and our shadows are lower. And you can see on this one, that actually like really made a difference right away. If we turn that off, it looks pretty flat, and then it gets really punchy, really fast. Definitely easier to see what you're looking at with this contrasty S-curve applied. So then we're going to grab our hue versus saturation. I would like to change the sky color a little bit so that we have more of a cyan, like a darker cyan, and less of like a really light sky blue. I want it to really be contrasting with those oranges. So more like that is what I'm looking for. Just like that. And then if we grab our hue versus luminance, I'm going to turn that down a little bit so that we get a little bit more of that color showing up. Okay, here. So since this was shot on my T6i and things are moving quickly, you can see that a lot of this up here is getting chewed up from the grading that we're doing. And you'll generally still see those even once you get zoomed out. So if you look around these trees, those are starting to look broken, and if you're looking up in the sky, that's starting to look broken too. So that's a pretty good indicator that we've gone too far and want to bring it back closer to where we started. So in this case, right there, we're good to go. And then we'll take on our hue versus hue page, we'll grab all of those reds and see if moving them somewhere else is going to do something different and make it look good, or if, look at that, we made a lush jungle out of some dead foliage. So if we bring that up, some serious cotton candy level stuff, and then bring that back down. Oh, we lost our dot. It's over here now. I think I'm going to leave this one where it is, because we get a lot of crazy effects as soon as we start moving that around like that. So we'll go ahead and leave that. And we'll drop that down. I'm actually just going to delete these dots. And this one, now, if we watch it, that's off, that's on. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave this one just like that. It's a pretty easy, fast color grade on this clip, but really the natural colors here looked pretty good on film anyway, and you don't need to do a lot to it. So we're going to leave that one there, and we're going to move on to this one, which is the highway. And this one I actually kind of like that it doesn't have a lot of contrast. So I'm going to leave that S-curve alone. I might just take our shadows and make them a little bit darker without bringing up those highlights. So we can see that we have green in the bridges, green on the sign, green in the trees, and then this car right here probably has a little bit of green going on in it as well. So there's a lot of green in this image, which either you'll probably want to focus on or pull away from. So if we wanted to take these greens and make them less apparent, we'll go ahead and jump into our hue versus sat, grab a wide range on our greens here, and just bring these down. So now the greens are less saturated and everything else is still right where it was. So now we have room to adjust our reds, our yellows, everything else to make those kind of pop out a little bit more. We can really bring this out if we go ahead and get our reds and our greens, and we bring our greens down in the luminance and really darken those. And then if we bring our reds up and brighten those reds, they'll be even more apparent to the eye. And we can see right there that I created a curve between the red and the green, which also brought up the luminance of these yellows because they're included in this space. So we're bringing out a lot more of the other colors that aren't green, but if we really want to dial in on that green, we'll get rid of a bunch of these dots, get this reset, and then we'll grab a wide range on the green, bring that up so it's brighter, and then we'll go into our hue versus saturation, bring these up so our greens are more saturated as well as being brighter, and then that really brings out the green color in this bridge as well as this one and the sign and all those green things that we talked about earlier. So now that our colors are squared away, I'm going to add just a touch of contrast in there, like really just a small amount, and then increase that saturation just across the board. I want this one to look a bit more bright, a little bit more happy, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into number 2. I'm going to cool it off just a touch, which I think really brings out some of like the crispness in the footage, and then I'm going to bring these mid-tone details up as well in order to really bring out some of those details in the bridge. Like you have all these rivets up here, you've got the lights on the truck, and if we bring those details all the way up, all of those things are going to become very apparent, as well as the grain in the road. All sorts of things are going to show up. And I'm actually going to bring the highlights down a little bit on this one, and I'm going to bring our shadows up a little bit on this one. So our darker areas look lighter, but we don't want to wash them out. We don't want them to look bad. So just keep an eye on your stuff. And then we'll turn these effects off. This is what we started with. We'll turn these effects back on. This is where we're at now. Little tweaks, guys. It doesn't need to be anything drastic unless you're really going for some crazy looks. So this next one is significantly darker. So we'll get that kind of like on my base there. And you can see that we already have some serious noise going on in these shadowy areas. So this one is going to be pretty hard to work with, especially in the free version, because correct me if I'm wrong in the comments down below, but I don't think the free version has access to the built-in noise reduction. So what we're going to do to get around that is go ahead and grab our mid-tone detail and just bring that down a bit. Because if that's lowered, it's going to make everything in the image more smooth. And then if we zoom back out, I bet you a lot of that noise looks like it's pretty reduced, which is the case. I mean, everything in the image looks soft now, but it's dark, and I mean, we have limited options here, because when something comes out looking like this, there's not always a lot you can do. But I think that looks alright, and we can get rid of some of that noise, actually, by making our darker areas darker, and then you'll see that a lot of that noise is removed until we get into those lighter areas. So if we zoom out now, we have that dark area around the base, and you have to zoom in really now to get a lot of that noise. So we'll bring our lighter areas down, and then I want to get that lamp in there a little bit, and then I like the color on the base here. It always shows up well on video. So I'll go ahead and grab our oranges because that's where it likes to keep it. And sometimes, like up here, we're a little bit purple just because things are dark. But I'm going to go hue versus saturation, and then I'm going to increase the saturation on those reds and oranges a little bit so that we get a little bit more saturation out of the base. But when I do that, you'll see that we lose a lot of the integrity of this footage right here. And again, guys, when you're dealing with dark footage, sometimes it's just hard. You see that that is just part of the footage. Even if we reset everything, that is going to look nasty around there. So undo, bring that softening back, bring that color back, and that's all we can do for that. But if we take a look at this image overall, we fit it, and then we turn our effects off, we have this, and we turn our effects on, we have this. And this, just for this scene, is probably the best we can do, at least given the time and the tools available to us in this case. Because I don't want to spend 3 hours in this tutorial trying to make this shot look perfect, but sometimes you just gotta do something small just to make it look better, and then get it to look like it belongs in your film, and then move on. Because unless you're gonna reshoot, sometimes things like this just happen. So on to the next one now. We have the fountain. On this one, you'll see that we have a very overexposed area on the left side of our frame. That is going to be difficult. Just like the dark shot was difficult, this one is also going to be difficult because all of the colors over here and all of the colors over here, as far as Davinci is concerned, are at different enough luminance values, which is the brightness again, to be considered different. So as we adjust one, the other one might adjust differently or not adjust at all. If we try to make this adjustment by just playing with the true white little dot here on our curves, we'll see that before we actually cut out on that bright spot, we just end up getting rid of pretty much everything. So we're going to make a couple of points up here, and you might be thinking, hey, why don't you just bring this first one here, this brightest one, all the way down? And you can, but you will see up here we have a lot of those artifacts showing up where it looks really dark, where it would just make more sense to the brain for that area to be bright because you just assume the sun is up there. So we're going to leave that, pretty much ignore that for the sake of this grade. So I'm going to bring our light colors up, I'm going to bring our dark colors down a little bit, and then again the offset we're just going to leave alone. And then the gain on this one we're going to move more toward orange. The gamma, we're going to move more toward orange, and then we're going to want some cyan in those shadows because I want the cyan to affect the green because the green is darker, so that's why we're using lift. And then in our leaves and stuff, I want to really bring out that orange, so in the gain and the gamma, I'm going to be turning it more toward the orange side. And now just a quick check to make sure that we didn't completely ruin anything. We're going for more of a stylized look on this one, as you can see. And then for this one, we're just going to skip right over the saturation and go straight to color boost because we are looking for that style. We're going to bring out a lot of those colors on the ground, on the sidewalk, all over the place. This is going to become a very colorful, oversaturated image very quickly. That's kind of what we're shooting for. So I'm going to bring some of those shadows down, and I'm going to leave the highlights alone. And I'm actually going to reduce the mid-tone detail pretty significantly on this one because we have all this bright light up here, which kind of makes me feel like I want to make the image soft and make it look almost like dreamlike because of this huge overexposed area. So you see that we have a little bit of a blue thing going on up here in our bright area. What we're going to do to get rid of that is actually make a new node over here. So we're going to add node, add serial, and now we have the same thing but with no effects. So this one is just, it looks like this. We're going to use this node. We're going to go ahead and select our qualifier tool down here, and then we're going to click on that blue area, and we'll see that right here, that is all it grabbed, and that's great because on this one, we're going to bring this color boost all the way down so that shows up as white again because now it's completely desaturated. So we can now go back and start making more changes on this one if we want to, but I think for what we're going for, we've used a bunch of the tools, we've adjusted our gain, gamma, lift, we've used our curves, we've used these little sliders down here, and really, I think at this point, you guys are good to go. Just get out there, color grade your footage, even if some of it looks bad, just practice. You gotta practice color grading, otherwise you probably aren't gonna get good at it. That does it for today's video. Make sure you've subscribed if you haven't already, because I think it's 94% of my viewers aren't subscribed to the channel, and if you would subscribe and you watch a lot, that actually does help the channel. So make sure you do that. And now that you've done that and click the bell while you were down there, that does it for this video, and I will see you tomorrow.